My name is Emily Carson, and my boss's wife tried to fire me behind his back, but she didn't know one crucial detail about my contract, and you should have seen my boss's reaction when he returned from vacation. You never really forget the sound of your own name being weaponized. Not in a boardroom, not under fluorescent lights, and definitely not in the wide-open atrium of Whitmore and Raynor, where voices echoed like gunshots across the polished marble floors. Emily Carson, Heather's voice cut through the low murmur of lunchtime conversations, sharp and theatrical, heads turned, forks paused halfway to mouths. My heart slammed against my ribs, but outwardly, I kept folding the marketing reports into my leather tote like nothing had happened. I should have known. I should have seen it coming the moment Heather strutted into the building that morning, high heels snapping like drum beats, grinning that too-wide grin. She was practically vibrating with the kind of energy people get when they think they've already won. "Effective immediately," she announced, stepping closer, savoring every syllable. "You are terminated for misconduct and failure to comply with internal protocols." It was so absurd, it took a second for the words to land. Misconduct? Protocols? I blinked up at her, not angry, not afraid, just stunned. Because right then, right there, I realized she wasn't just trying to fire me. She was trying to humiliate me. And judging by the way the atrium fell silent, she was getting exactly what she wanted. Behind Heather, a few junior associates fidgeted awkwardly. Jake from accounting looked like he wanted to sink into the tile. Even Linda, my usual ally on the strategy team, couldn't meet my eyes. I stood slowly. The chair legs scraped back with a long, shrill whine, and it felt, absurdly, like the sound of dignity being dragged across the floor. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice calm enough to make Heather's smile falter just a little. She hadn't expected that. She wanted a scene. Tears. Begging, maybe a spectacular meltdown to feed the office gossip for weeks. But I wasn't giving her that. Not today. "You are to leave the premises immediately," she said, louder now, as if volume could erase how shaky her hands had become. Security guards appeared near the elevators. Not moving, just hovering. Like vultures, waiting. "Of course," I said softly. I zipped my tote shut, feeling a strange, steady current run through my veins, like ice water and steel braided together. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tailored navy dress, sensible pumps, hair pinned up neatly, professional, put together. The kind of woman who didn't crumble under public spectacle. Heather must have hated that. I crossed the atrium, each step measured, heels clicking in time with the blood thudding in my ears. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. But just as I reached the heavy glass doors, I heard Heather's voice float after me, syrupy and triumphant. "Let this be a lesson to everyone." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so pitiful. A warning barked into the hollow space where respect should have lived. Outside, the midday sun hit me like a slap. The light was too clean, too real, after the manufactured chaos of the atrium. I stood there for a moment, blinking, letting the sounds of the city wash over me. Distant horns, the soft scuff of shoes on concrete, a siren wailing somewhere far off. In the reflection of the glass door behind me, Heather stood framed in the entranceway, arms crossed, watching like a hunter who thought she'd bagged her prize. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't broken. I was calculating, quiet, dangerous in a way she hadn't even begun to understand. Because humiliation, my friends, is fuel. And Heather had just handed me a full tank. The walk back to my desk felt like moving through water, every step deliberate, every breath drawn in against the weight pressing down on my chest. No one spoke. No one even dared to whisper. I moved through rows of cubicles like a ghost, unseen and untouchable. Somewhere, a printer whirred and beeped, stubbornly indifferent to the small disaster unfolding down the hall. I didn't rush. I refused to give Heather the satisfaction of seeing me scramble. Instead, I opened each drawer carefully, as if it were any other Tuesday afternoon. Notebook, pen set, a mug I'd picked up on a trip to Asheville. Stay soft, stay sharp, etched across the ceramic. Little pieces of a life spent building something here. A life she thought she could erase with a few loud words. My hand hesitated over a framed photo tucked in the corner of my desk. My father and me, arms slung around each other after my college graduation. He'd worn his good suit that day. The one he joked made him look like a, quote, real city lawyer. I slipped the frame into my tote carefully, feeling a hot sting rise behind my eyes. Not here, not now. I could feel the stares. Hot, pitying, or worse, relieved. Because it wasn't them. I didn't look up, didn't give them the show they were waiting for. When everything was packed, I straightened the nameplate from my desk. Emily Carson, Strategic Initiatives Manager, ran my thumb over the engraved letters once, then set it gently into the bag with everything else. No drama, no words, just clean, silent efficiency. At the elevator bank, I hit the button once, waited. Heather hadn't followed. She didn't need to. She thought the work was done. When the doors slid open, a man in a dark suit, someone I barely recognized from compliance, startled, stepping aside like I was contagious. I stepped inside without a word. The mirrored walls reflected me back, composed, professional, and beneath it something sharp beginning to surface. The parking garage was cold, concrete, and half empty. My footsteps echoed in the hollow space, rhythmic and solitary. With every step, the weight of what had just happened settled deeper into my bones. I spotted my car, a sensible navy blue sedan, polished and unremarkable, and unlocked it with a quiet beep. The sound bounced off the pillars, harsh and too loud in the silence. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let my hands rest on the steering wheel for a moment. Breathing, counting. 1, 2, 3, hold it together. The temptation to cry lurked at the edge of my vision, like a storm cloud too heavy to ignore. But I wouldn't give in. Not yet. Instead, I turned the key. The engine hummed to life, smooth and steady, grounding me. I pulled out of the spot slowly, navigating the curves of the garage with the same meticulousness I'd packed my things. At the exit, sunlight spilled across the concrete, blinding for a second. I blinked against it. Took one last glance in the rearview mirror at the building looming behind me, the glass and steel fortress where I had poured in years of my life. It didn't feel like defeat. Not exactly. It felt like the beginning of something, colder, sharper. By the time I emerged onto the highway, the anger was gone, burned away in the silence. What remained was colder. More precise. I wasn't going to fight Heather's arrogance with emotion. No. If she wanted a clean victory, she'd just unknowingly declared a very quiet war, and I had all the time in the world to win it. The kitchen smelled like the ghost of yesterday's coffee. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light, just the small lamp near the sink, throwing a pool of soft gold across the counter. Outside, the city hummed along without me, tail lights flickering like restless fireflies against the night. I set my tote down gently, the way you might set down something breakable after a long, brutal day. My keys clinked against the counter. My shoes were already off, kicked away near the door like I couldn't stand anything clinging to me from that office anymore. For a long time I just stood there, palms pressed against the cool granite, letting the heavy silence soak into my skin. No one to call, no one to explain it to, just me, and the faint, relentless drip of the faucet. I should have felt lost. Maybe a younger version of me would have. But all I felt was a strange, terrible clarity. Heather had humiliated me. She'd wanted it to be final, public, permanent. But something about the way she'd said it, barking out her authority like a queen exiling a traitor, gnawed at me. Because Heather wasn't my official superior, not on paper, not when it came to HR procedures. I pulled out the accordion file I kept tucked under the microwave, the one labeled simply employment. I hadn't looked at it in years. Most people never do until it's too late. The contract was still there, crisp and formal, printed on heavy cream paper, with the Whitmore and Raynor letterhead embossed at the top. I slid it out and flipped through the pages, scanning line after line, searching for what my gut was already screaming, and there it was. Clear as day. All terminations must be authorized and executed by a division vice president or higher, following formal HR procedures and documented review processes. Immediate dismissals must include legal counsel approval in cases of gross misconduct. I read it once, then again. Then I leaned back against the counter, the edge digging into my spine. Heather wasn't a VP. She was a department head. My department head, yes, but still 3 rungs below the authority needed to fire someone directly. She had no legal grounds, no HR process, no signed documentation. She'd barked her order in the middle of the atrium, banking on spectacle to make it real. But it wasn't real. Not yet. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the cold seeping up through the soles of my feet from the tiled floor. My hands smoothed the contract out in front of me, flattening every crease like I could iron away the chaos of the day. A half-empty coffee mug sat nearby, the contents long gone cold. I took a sip anyway, wincing at the bitterness. It tasted exactly right. This wasn't just about bruised pride anymore. This wasn't about embarrassment. It was about power. Misused, mishandled, and now vulnerable. Heather had exposed herself. I could almost see it, clear as a map unfolding in my mind. The path forward, slow and careful, paved with paper trails and legal precision. Not confrontation, not anger. Professionalism. Quiet, lethal, undeniable professionalism. I wasn't going to demand my job back. I wasn't going to yell or storm into an office and throw papers across a desk. No. That would give her the drama she craved. The image of instability she was no doubt counting on. Instead, I would become an immovable object. I would do everything by the book. Cleaner, smarter, calmer than she ever expected. By the time I was done, Heather wouldn't even realize the ground had shifted under her feet, until she was already falling. I glanced down at the contract again, my finger tracing the signature line at the bottom. My signature, bold and firm, right next to the words, "Terms enforceable in full compliance with state employment laws." Heather had picked the wrong woman to humiliate. The cafe was tucked into the corner of an old brick building, its windows fogged slightly from the April rain that had started to drift down in lazy sheets. The kind of place where the smell of roasted beans clung to the air, and mismatched chairs wobbled slightly when you sat down. It was comforting in a way that fluorescent-lit boardrooms could never be. I spotted Claire right away, already seated in the back booth, nursing a latte and flipping through her ever-present leather notebook. She looked up as I approached, one eyebrow lifting in silent question. I slid into the seat across from her, the weight of my tote hitting the bench with a dull thud. "No small talk?" she asked lightly, but her eyes were sharp, scanning me the way she might a hostile witness on the stand. "I don't have the energy for it," I said, wrapping my hands around the chipped ceramic mug the server set down without even asking for my order. Claire and I had been friends long enough. She knew my go-to, black coffee, no frills. She closed the notebook and leaned in, voice dropping low. "Tell me everything." I didn't rush. Instead, I laid it out the way she taught me years ago during late-night study marathons. Facts first, emotions later. Heather. The public firing. The contract. The clause she didn't have the authority to invoke. When I finished, Claire sat back, her mouth quirking in something that wasn't quite a smile. "She screwed up," she said simply. The words hit me harder than I expected. Because until that moment, some tiny, bruised part of me still wondered if I was just clinging to pride. If maybe I deserved this fall somehow. But hearing it from Claire, deliberate, clinical, true, was like throwing open a window in a smoke-filled room. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. Heather had broken the rules. And if she thought humiliating you would scare you off, Claire added, scribbling something onto a napkin, she really doesn't understand the game she's playing. I watched her draw 3 quick circles, then connect them with sharp lines. First move, she said, tapping the first circle. Documentation. Gather every shred you have. Emails, performance reviews, org charts, anything that shows the chain of command. Second move, she continued, tapping the second circle. Grievance filing. Not a lawsuit yet, just formal notification to the board. Forces them to investigate. Looks cleaner, smarter. And third, her finger landed on the last circle, keep your mouth shut to everyone else. No dramatic emails, no venting to coworkers, nothing they can twist into hostility or disruptive behavior. I nodded slowly, the plan slotting into place like a series of locks clicking open. And Claire, I said, voice low, what happens if the board finds she acted without authority? She smiled, this time with a flash of teeth. Best case? Reinstatement. Apology. Big settlement. And worst? They circle the wagons to protect the company name, she said, shrugging. But either way, Heather's credibility is gone. She won't survive it. I stared down at my coffee, watching the tiny eddies swirl and collapse against the sides of the mug. It was happening. The first quiet moves in a battle she didn't even know she'd started. I don't want revenge, I said, surprising myself a little. Claire nodded. You want your dignity back. Exactly. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming a soft tattoo against the window glass. Inside, the cafe was warm and dim, and smelled of cinnamon and espresso and second chances. I pulled my contract out of the tote and slid it across the table. Claire opened her notebook again, flipped to a fresh page, and began writing, carefully, methodically. By the time we finished our second round of coffee, the plan was mapped out. No shouting, no scandal, just careful, patient professionalism, the kind that doesn't make noise, until it's too late to stop it. The grievance letter sat open on my laptop screen, cursor blinking patiently at the bottom, like it could wait all day for me to hit send. A single sheet of words. Clean, unemotional, devastating in its simplicity. Subject. Formal grievance regarding improper termination procedure recipient. Whitmore and Raynor Board of Directors. I had read it 6 times already. Every line crafted under Claire's careful eye. Every claim anchored to a policy number, a legal precedent, a written company rule. No anger, no storytelling, just facts. The kind of letter that didn't demand attention with noise. It demanded it with truth. I glanced once at the clock. 8:23 a.m. Perfect. The office would be just filling up now. Coffee mugs steaming on desks, keyboards clacking to life. Heather maybe still basking in whatever private triumph she thought she'd secured. She had no idea the first crack had already formed under her feet. I drew a breath, steady, controlled, and clicked. Send. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was quieter than I expected. Almost. Anticlimactic. No immediate thunderclap. No alarm bells. Just the quiet knowledge that somewhere, on the 26th floor, board members were opening an email that would change everything. I closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in my chair. Now came the harder part. The waiting. The pretending. Claire had been clear. I couldn't tip my hand. So I pulled on a fresh blazer. Not the navy one I wore the day Heather humiliated me, but a new one, dark green, a color that felt like steady ground under my skin, and drove to the office like it was any other ordinary Thursday. The parking garage was as grim and gray as ever, same flickering fluorescent lights, same puddles gathering where the rain snuck in through hairline cracks in the ceiling. I gathered my things slowly, methodically from the passenger seat, tote bag, notebook, a single pen clipped to the outside, everything in its place. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual, each floor dinging by with glacial patience. When the doors slid open onto my floor, the familiar hum of office life wrapped around me. Low voices, the mechanical clatter of printers, the soft ring of incoming calls. No one looked up. No one whispered. It was as if the atrium scene from 2 days ago had already been swept under the sterile, beige rug of corporate memory. Exactly as I'd hoped. Heather's office door was closed. I caught a glimpse of her through the frosted glass, laughing with someone. All glossy hair and exaggerated smiles, a woman drunk on false security. Let her have it. Let her think the storm had passed. I walked to my desk, sat down, logged in, like nothing had happened. Every tap of my keyboard felt louder than it should have. Every glance from a coworker, casual, indifferent, felt like a tiny triumph. Because while they all smiled and nodded and scrolled through emails, the real war had already begun. It was unfolding in boardrooms and inboxes and legal briefings. None of them could see yet. My hands moved automatically, answering emails, drafting reports, while my mind stayed razor-sharp, every nerve tuned to the undercurrent no one else seemed to notice. And beneath it all, a strange, quiet satisfaction unfurled inside me. This wasn't anger anymore. It was control. I wasn't the woman sobbing in the parking lot. I wasn't the employee tail between her legs, begging for scraps. I was something steadier, something inevitable. The clock on my screen blinked forward, minute by minute, hour by hour. Every second that passed was a step closer to the reckoning Heather never saw coming. By Friday afternoon, the office buzz had shifted. You could feel it. A strange, brittle kind of energy, like the air before a summer thunderstorm. But Heather? She floated through it, untouched, a queen surveying a kingdom she thought was finally hers. The monthly staff mixer had been hastily repurposed into something else entirely, a thinly veiled celebration of new leadership initiatives, which was Heather's way of saying, I won. The event was held in the company's small event space, white walls, 2 bright lights, and a sad tray of mini quitches sweating under plastic wrap. Someone had strung up a banner that read New Horizons in crooked gold letters. The irony nearly made me laugh. I stood near the back, sipping a plastic cup of flat ginger ale, blending into the wall like bad wallpaper. That was the strategy now, quiet, invisible, gathering everything. Heather moved from cluster to cluster, basking in her false victory. Her voice, syrupy and just a hair too loud, drifted over the low thrum of polite conversation. I really think we're entering a bold new phase, she cooed to one group, smiling like she'd built the company herself. A few forced chuckles answered her. No one dared look too long at me, the woman she'd supposedly dethroned. But I watched. I saw the side eyes, the uncomfortable shifting from foot to foot. Because deep down, people knew something was off. Maybe they couldn't name it yet, but the cracks had started to show. At one point, Heather lifted her cup, some cheap Prosecco someone had dug out from a catering closet, and called out, "To new beginnings!" A weak chorus echoed her words. She beamed like she'd conquered Rome. I sipped my ginger ale, let the bubbles fizz flat on my tongue, and thought, you should enjoy this moment. It's the last easy one you'll have. Because the board had received my grievance, the HR audit had been triggered. And Daniel was on a plane back from his 2-week vacation, completely unaware that his department had become a battlefield in his absence. Beat. The Monday morning air felt heavier than usual. Even the elevators seemed slower, as if the building itself knew trouble was coming. I settled into my desk early, the quiet hum of my computer booting up the only sound around me. The official board acknowledgement email sat neatly in my inbox, neutral in tone, lethal in implication. Heather breezed in at 8:57, looking impossibly pleased with herself. She barely spared me a glance. At 9:13, Daniel's first email hit the company-wide thread. Emergency department meeting, 1 p.m. sharp. Attendance mandatory. A small ripple passed through the floor. Whispers. Nervous glances. The scent of fear mixed with the burnt coffee smell of the office kitchen. I pictured Daniel at the airport lounge just 24 hours ago, skimming through the dozens of employee complaints that had flooded his inbox while he was blissfully offline. I imagined his frown deepening with every subject line. Concerns regarding Heather M., hostile work environment report, questionable termination procedures. By lunch, you could feel the tension pressing down on everyone, even Heather, though she still wore the polished smile of someone trying not to blink. Me? I stayed silent, worked through my reports. A model employee with not a single outward crack. Let them wonder, let them panic. Because by 1 p.m., when that conference room door swung open, the real show would begin. The conference room was already packed when I arrived. You could feel it, the tight, electric charge in the air, the uneasy shuffle of bodies trying to look casual while sneaking glances at the door. Daniel stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from rain or maybe just sweat. He didn't look angry exactly. He looked like a man trying to piece together a disaster he hadn't seen coming. Heather was seated 3 chairs down, perched stiffly in her navy power suit, lips pressed into a smile so tight it looked like it hurt. Her hands rested perfectly still on the table, but her fingers were white at the knuckles. I stepped through the doorway, quiet, deliberate, and the room shifted. First, a few heads turned, then a few more, like a slow, reluctant wave rolling through the room. Someone, I think it was Jake from accounting, actually gasped. I walked in as if I belonged there, because I did. Because on paper, on record, and under the law, I was still an employee in full standing. Heather's face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like a fish pulled out of water, struggling for breath. I didn't look at her, not yet. Instead, I offered Daniel a crisp nod and took an open seat at the far end of the table, folding my hands neatly in front of me. My presence said everything I needed it to. I'm here. I never left. And your little coup? It's already falling apart. Daniel cleared his throat, his gaze flickering from Heather to me and back again. Thank you all for coming, he said, voice measured but tight. We have several serious matters to address today. Heather shifted in her seat, forcing a bright, brittle laugh. I'm sure it's just some misunderstandings, she said lightly, waving one manicured hand. You know how it is. People resist change at first. Daniel didn't smile. Didn't even blink. Change is expected, he said, but violating company policy? Failing to follow standard procedures regarding personnel decisions? The word procedures landed like a slap. Sharp. Public. Heather flinched, just slightly. From my seat, I could see the micro-expressions rippling across the faces around the table. Confusion, curiosity, the dawning realization that this wasn't a normal Monday meeting. Daniel pulled out a stack of papers, setting them down with a firm thud. In the last week, he continued, we've received formal grievances, anonymous complaints, and direct reports about serious misconduct. He flipped the first page over casually, as if it didn't contain the beginning of someone's end. Some of those reports involve alleged hostile behavior. Others, he paused meaningfully, involve improper disciplinary actions taken without required approvals. Heather opened her mouth again. I could almost see the script she was reaching for, but Daniel held up a hand. Not yet. The authority in his voice was final. No room for negotiation, no space for excuses. I sat perfectly still, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, my breathing slow and even. Every cell in my body hummed with restrained satisfaction, because this wasn't just about me. This was about the rot at the center. The arrogance, the shortcuts, the belief that you could make up the rules if you were loud enough, bold enough, cruel enough. But there are some things you can't shout into being, and legitimacy is one of them. Heather sat frozen, a small bead of sweat breaking along her temple despite the cool hum of the AC. Daniel looked around the table, meeting every set of eyes in turn. "Today," he said, voice dropping slightly, "we start setting things right." And for the first time in weeks, a deep, quiet calm settled into my bones. Because I wasn't the one fighting for my seat anymore. The fight had moved to another battlefield entirely. And Heather wasn't nearly as prepared as she thought she was. Heather cleared her throat. It was the sound of a woman trying to scrape together dignity from the ruins of a crumbling defense. "If I may," she began, her voice brittle but still reaching for authority, "I'd like to clarify a few things." Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, not stopping her, just letting the rope out. Heather flashed a quick, strained smile at the table. A performance meant for anyone still willing to believe in her version of events. "The decision regarding Emily Carson," she said, gesturing toward me with a flick of her hand that tried and failed to look casual, "was made in the best interest of departmental efficiency." The words hung in the air, absurdly hollow. I didn't move, didn't blink. She was digging her own grave. She just didn't know how deep yet. "I had consulted with HR," Heather added quickly, voice pitching a little too high, "and I understood that I had the discretion to—" "You understood incorrectly," Daniel said, cutting her off with a voice so calm it was almost cruel. He flipped open a folder, the sound crisp, surgical, and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Here is the HR Policy Manual, Section 4.3, he read aloud, "regarding disciplinary action. All termination decisions must be approved by Human Resources and the Division Vice President, following formal internal review. No exceptions." He slid the document across the table toward Heather, who stared at it like it might bite her. The room was dead silent. No one shifted. No one coughed. The only sound was the faint whir of the overhead fan and the slow, inevitable collapse of Heather's carefully constructed version of events. She started again, her hands fluttering helplessly. "There was implied permission. We had discussed scenarios where—" Daniel raised one eyebrow. "Implied permission?" The two words echoed off the glass walls. Heather's mouth opened, closed. Someone down the table, "Linda, maybe," let out the smallest exhale, almost a laugh, quickly stifled. Daniel leaned forward, folding his hands. "Did you receive written authorization to terminate Ms. Carson?" Heather's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "And did you complete the required incident documentation, the misconduct reports, the internal investigation logs?" "No," she said again, her voice cracking. "And did you notify HR or seek legal counsel before carrying out a termination in a public space without due process?" Heather didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Around the room, I could feel it. The slow, collective turning of the tide. The way people straightened in their seats. The way they suddenly stopped looking at me like a cautionary tale and started looking at Heather like a liability. Because in corporate America, incompetence is a sin, but arrogance, when paired with exposure, that's fatal. Daniel nodded once, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion, the kind of signal generals give when the outcome of the battle is no longer in question. "We'll be proceeding with a full internal review," he said, rising to his feet. "Effective immediately. Heather Mitchell is placed on administrative leave pending the investigation." Heather gasped like she'd been slapped. "No," she stammered, rising from her chair, desperation leaking out around the edges of her voice. "You can't. This is a misunderstanding." Daniel didn't even turn to look at her. "This meeting is concluded." And just like that, the room emptied, people scattering like leaves before a coming storm, avoiding her gaze, avoiding mine. I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the weight of it settle into my bones. Not triumph, not victory. Just justice, slow and steady, doing its patient, brutal work. I gathered my notebook, tucking it neatly into my tote, and rose. Heather was still standing there, frozen, her face a portrait of disbelief. For one small, fleeting moment, our eyes met. And in that look, there was no rage, no apology, no understanding, only fear. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet, steady voice whispered, "You did this to yourself." The email hit inboxes at 4:32 p.m. sharp. Mandatory all-staff meeting, 5 p.m. company auditorium. No agenda, no explanation. Just the kind of summons that made the blood drain from every face on the floor. I sat at my desk, watching the panic ripple outward. Whispers. Tense glances. Heather's name darting from mouth to mouth like a virus no one wanted to admit they carried. I closed my laptop slowly and rose, smoothing the front of my blazer. This wasn't gloating. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was inevitability. By the time I reached the auditorium, the room was nearly full. Rows of folding chairs stretching out like a sea of uncertainty. Employees clutched coffee cups, phones, anything to anchor themselves. At the front of the stage, Daniel stood behind the podium, his face carved from stone. And, beside him, a figure that made the entire room tilt slightly off balance. Heather. Smaller now, dimmer, as if some essential light inside her had been snuffed out. Daniel tapped the microphone once, the sharp pop making everyone jump. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low but carrying easily across the tense silence. "I'll keep this brief." He glanced at Heather, who stared at the floor like it might open and swallow her whole. "In light of recent internal findings," Daniel continued, "it has come to our attention that actions were taken without appropriate authorization, resulting in significant legal and financial exposure for Whitmore and Raynor." A ripple of shock moved through the audience, sharp, electric. "Due to these actions," Daniel said, each word measured, "we are now facing multiple regulatory fines and potential civil liabilities." I sat in the third row, hands folded neatly in my lap, my face a mask of polite attention. Inside, my heart beat, slow and steady. Heather flinched visibly at the word liabilities. She wasn't stupid, she knew what that meant. Lawsuits, settlements, maybe worse. Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And as part of corrective measures," he said, voice tightening, "an apology is required." The spotlight shifted fully to her now. There was nowhere to run. Heather stepped forward, the click of her heels unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. She gripped the edges of the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her voice cracked on the first word. "I would like to apologize, publicly," she said, forcing the words out like broken glass. "Specifically to Emily Carson, for my improper actions and the harm they caused." A beat. A breathless, stunned beat. She couldn't even look at me. I didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there and let it happen. "Emily," she said, voice trembling, "I'm sincerely sorry." She meant none of it. We both knew that, but it didn't matter, because this wasn't about sincerity, it was about consequences, and they were landing one by one, exactly where they needed to. Daniel cleared his throat and stepped back to the microphone. "Effective immediately, Heather Mitchell has resigned from her position." A low, collective exhale swept through the room. It was over, clean, official. I rose quietly, joining the slow, stunned shuffle of bodies exiting the auditorium. As I walked toward the glass doors, the late afternoon sun cutting long gold bars across the floor, a single thought crystallized in my mind. You don't have to fight every battle with noise. Sometimes the cleanest victories are won in silence.